First, it was solar panels, then electric vehicles, and now China has upped the ante. It wants to overthrow the US and take over the throne of artificial intelligence. And guess what? Everything suggests that it is succeeding.
A shocking Chinese AI advancement called DeepSeek is sending US stocks plunging. DeepSeek threatened the aura of invincibility surrounding America's technology industry.
Basically, a Chinese company has created an artificial intelligence chatbot as good as ChatGPT-o1, which is one of the best there is. But what is really significant is that it has done so with hardly any resources and about 25 times less money. Not surprisingly, if you ask this AI what it thinks of Tiananmen, it will tell you that it's a beautiful square, ideal for getting some sun in the afternoon. And you wouldn't ask this question if you were in China. Although, as it is open source, you can run it locally without passing your data on to Xi Jinping. And why has this shaken the US stock market? Well, it's very simple to understand. The big tech companies have been receiving a phenomenal amount of funding. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars. But of course, now a Chinese company has shown that it doesn't need so much money, that they can compete with the big giants using only second-rate graphics cards and a few million. Or to put it another way, until now, the larger the AI models, the more expensive it was to train them. With some exceptions, yes, but that has been the general rule. Nevertheless, DeepSeek has come along to say that all that investment is actually surplus to requirements, because with a few million, you can achieve the same results. Let's remember that in 2023, the US private sector invested 10 times more money in artificial intelligence than the Chinese. And yes, there are suspicions that they might be lying regarding the costs, but let's face it, no one who is well versed in the AI world has been caught by surprise. China has been proving for years that it can create cutting-edge technology products at a fraction of the cost of the rest of the world, and it was only a matter of time before artificial intelligence got its turn. Also, keep one thing in mind. DeepSeek has not come from the biggest university in China, from any major company or anything like that, but from a small investment firm. What do I mean by this? Well, it's not as if China had pulled out all the stops to compete with the US, not at all. This AI has emerged naturally from the Chinese environment, and if nothing special had to happen for it to emerge, then we're likely to see similar developments from many other companies. DeepSeek is not an exception. It's just an early example of what's to come. So the million-dollar question is clear. What has China done to become so competitive in this field of technology? And will it really be able to compete head-to-head with the US, or even to surpass it? We created this video by saying that the case of AI is not special. To give just one example, everyone already knows that China is producing electric vehicles that could challenge the very heart of European industry. But it's not something completely true either. There is something special about this case. And to answer that, we first need to understand a key concept: the China cycle. The China cycle is what many economists have called a phenomenon that has repeated itself many times in recent decades. It all starts with a company moving production to China in search of cheap labor, serious economies of scale, and a growing domestic market. For example, think of Apple setting up factories to assemble its iPhones. At the beginning, everything seems fantastic, and the foreign companies experience a honeymoon with the Chinese companies. Yet, as the years pass, the Chinese learn the know-how and the procedures from these factories. And after that, the Chinese get everything they need to set up their own companies. But of course, why settle for assembling cell phones? If they already have the necessary infrastructure and qualified personnel, why not set up their own brand of cell phones? And this is how the Asian giant starts to produce its own products, like those of Xiaomi or Huawei, products of good quality and at a ridiculous fraction of the cost of the competition. The outcome, they end up sweeping Western companies that once invested in China out of the market. Even so, this is not what has happened with AI. To begin with, no foreign company went there to invest in China. The Chinese have developed it on their own. And yes, it's true that the model is not entirely new, since it's based on the technology developed by ChatGPT, but it has added a lot of innovations of its own. And what is one of the most significant of these innovations? Training. One of the bottlenecks in AI is the lack of quality data to train them on. But DeepSeek doesn't care about this lack of new data, because what's important is not so much the training, but a subsequent adjustment that hardly needs any data, because what is being evaluated is the model's chain of reasoning, and not the raw data. In short, the China cycle does not explain how the Asian giant has become so good at this technology. DeepSeek looks more like the technological breakthrough we are more used to seeing in American companies than in Chinese ones. So then, what has this country done to be able to compete with the US? There are at least two main explanations: demographics and national security. In China, there are a lot of engineers and other skilled personnel looking for ways to innovate. And we say this not only because it's the second most populated country on the planet, but also because it's one of the countries with the highest percentage of graduates in technical careers compared to other degrees. As you can see in this other graph, China has always had a fairly high percentage of university students studying engineering, even during Maoism. By way of comparison, in the same period, Indian engineers, famous throughout the world, were not even 5% of the total. And today, they barely reach 15%, half as many as in China. But there's more. So far, we've focused on university students, but the truth is that, until recently, China gave very little importance to higher education. To give you an idea, in 1950, China had the same percentage of children in primary education as India, but did not match its percentage of university students until 2000. The reason? The Chinese government prioritized primary and secondary education, as well as adult education, over university. The typical thing for a Chinese worker was to finish high school, go to work, and learn on the job, or through specialized courses, much more practical courses than what is usually offered at university. And this is one of the reasons why it was able to attract so much investment when it opened its doors to the world. It already had many well-trained workers. No, they wouldn't have a university degree, but they knew how to do their job very well.
China adopted a bottom-up approach in expanding its education system. The human capital produced due to educational differentiation also helped in building a robust manufacturing sector in China.
This approach worked very well for them in mastering technology, but they did not sit idly by. Since then, the number of college students has been gradually increasing, and by 2040, they're expected to be 45% of the workforce. The reason lies in this next graph. China has a brutal demographic problem due to the one-child policy. In fact, its population in the year 2100 is expected to be half of what it is today. What does this mean? Well, with an aging population, it's much more difficult to grow economically, and China still has a long way to go to converge with the rest of the rich countries. However, as you can see, the ratio of young people to those over 65 is falling at full speed and could stagnate at a GDP per capita well below that of Japan. In short, the goal is to make the economy less and less dependent on labor, because there will be a shortage of labor. To move from a model centered on factories to one centered on laboratories and offices, and hence the need for more and more higher education. That is why it's not only Chinese factories that are highly competitive. Their universities are also becoming more and more leading edge, and will become even more so in the future. In fact, they have already surpassed the US in terms of citations in the prestigious scientific journal Nature. And let's see, it's true that citations are not the only relevant metric, because not all cited papers are equally important. And we also know that Chinese scientists have a very strong bias when it comes to citing each other. Be that as it may, the data are there. China will become more and more a scientific powerhouse. Do you want specific data? Well, in 2023, China accounted for 63% of all new patents related to artificial intelligence, compared to 20% for the US. And it's true that in per capita terms, Uncle Sam still doubles the Asian giant, but technological progress does not care about per capita. So now I'm sure you understand much better how China has created a model like DeepSeek. And do you know the best part? That there is still the other half of the explanation. Artificial intelligence has the potential to change everything, from education to how we move to the battlefield. That is why the US has taken it very seriously not to let China become an AI superpower. And here are just a few examples of the export controls that Joe Biden imposed on Xi Jinping, prohibiting his country from buying the latest model graphics cards used to train the most cutting-edge AIs. And as we say around here, no sooner said than done. Semiconductor exports to China plummeted. But we aren't only talking about semiconductors. Right now, a Dutch company, ASML, basically has a monopoly on the machines needed to convert these semiconductors into state-of-the-art chips, and the US reached an agreement with the Netherlands to block exports of these machines as well. However, the US cannot claim victory either, because China has been importing other machines to manufacture its own semiconductors. Huawei, for example, is already making significant advances in this field. It is likely that, in a few years, China will have its own domestic microchip industry, which is a sector that, for now, is still beyond its reach. But this is not the most significant thing. The saying goes that necessity is the mother of invention, and that is exactly what has happened. DeepSeek couldn't access the latest model graphics cards, so it has had to make do with creating a hyper-optimized model that runs on less powerful chips. Yes, Biden's control on China, not dominating AI, may be precisely why it's taking off right now. That's what you call irony. And let's see, by this, I'm not saying that export controls have been positive for China. Believe me, they have also caused their own problems.
SMIC to remain on the 7 nanometers lithography until at least 2026, limiting Huawei's advancement, despite receiving a near unlimited budget from the government.
My point is that export controls on high-tech exports are only a temporary measure, and if the US wants to compete, it will have to become more competitive. Their only strategy cannot be to try to put a stick in China's wheel, and in part, that explains laws such as the CHIPS Act, which seeks to boost investment in this sector in the US. So far, the CHIPS Act has been extremely successful in attracting investment, especially considering that it was not a particularly large program. It remains to be seen whether this investment will end up being productive, but there are already some factories in operation that are not reporting problems. Conclusion: China has millions of highly skilled workers doing research on this topic, which is also a national priority for Xi Jinping, putting pressure on them to become extremely efficient. And that's not all. The Chinese Communist Party has enormous control over banking. What does that mean? That it can direct lots of investment into these sectors. For example, you remember that the company that created DeepSeek was actually an investment fund. The fact is that Xi Jinping is not very happy about all things in the world of finance, so he keeps a tight rein, and in 2019, he toughened his stance even more. The result? Well, these financial firms had to redirect their resources to other fields. Artificial intelligence, for instance. Because, well, I assume you all know this already, but investment funds are full of physicists, mathematicians, and engineers who also use the latest microchip technology, mainly because they need very low latencies to be able to do financial operations at full speed. This has led many analysts to believe that the US is wasting the talents of many scientists in the financial world, instead of having them in a laboratory making advances in the real economy. Does this make sense? Well, most likely, no. I mean, even leaving aside the bias that many people have towards the financial world, as if it were all smoke and speculation that contributed nothing to the real economy, the argument still wouldn't make much sense. Among the top companies that employ mathematicians and physicists in finance, such as Citadel or Jane Street, they do not even reach a third of the employees that Google has, and generate less revenue than IKEA. The story is spectacular. Look what happens when you get the financial sector to eat everything. But that's just a story. Although one thing is certain, there is a lot to learn from the Chinese, but not about finance, but rather about education and business organization, because that is where the key really lies. But at this point, it's your turn. Did you expect China to advance so fast in artificial intelligence? Which of all the reasons we've talked about seem to be the most important? Will the US take the lead again when it releases its next models? You can leave me your answers down in the comments. And as always, don't forget that here on VisualPolitik, we release new videos every week, so subscribe to this channel, hit the little bell so you don't miss any of our updates. If you like this video, like it, and I'll see you in the next one. All the best, see you next time.